it doesn't matter to me what you say, because God's not going to hold someone else accountable for what I teach my kids. God's going to hold me accountable. Ephesians 6:1 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." That's one of the verses that my wife and I have been teaching our children, because one, it teaches children what to do, especially in our world today, that children are supposed to obey their parents. On the flip side, parents are responsible for teaching their kids the right thing to obey. Maybe it's because they don't think she's qualified to do so. And I could understand, because I am a certified teacher here in the state of Washington. My wife is not. I have confidence in my wife because, first of all, God has entrusted our children to us. We are their parents, and we're their primary educator at home. It starts in the home, and God has equipped her and will equip her and will encourage her to do so, because she is their mother, and she doesn't need a certificate to validate her motherhood.
Tell me a little about your faith journey, man. Why do you believe in God?
I would like to say it started with God introducing himself through my mom many years ago in my late teens. And what I mean by that is, I never read the Bible with my family. I never prayed with my family. So in that sense, I wouldn't say I was raised in a Christian home, but I have memories of my mom sitting at the table and writing scripture down on a sheet of paper. And I have memories of her inviting me to various youth groups and stuff, summer camps. And I always declined, and she never pushed it on me. But one day I finally said yes, and I ended up praying and inviting God to be a part of my life. And sometime after that, I started to read the Bible on my own and started to pray. No one told me to do that, but I just had a desire to do that. And I believe through that, God was bringing me closer. And then fast forward many years, just learning what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And now at 40, I'm learning that I can't deny God, even though I will behave in ways that rebel against God. I can't deny the existence of God, because for me to deny that there's a creator for this creation, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest with these beautiful trees and mountains and rivers, it's like me to look at my kids who love to build Legos and say, when they say to me, "Daddy, look at this Lego that I built," for me to say, "Hey, that's really cool. I love the way that it built itself." They're going to say, "No, Daddy, we built it." And for me to say that Lego built itself is ridiculous. And so is the same as we see all this beauty around us and say there was no intelligent, creative, imaginative mind behind it. Mm-hmm. So now I live with that mind that God's presence is here. He's made himself known to me. I'm held accountable by his law to live righteously, but he doesn't leave me here by himself. He's with me. He empowers me. And because I have this rebellious heart, sin that we call it, that's why I have the gospel of Jesus Christ, that his death on the cross means for me to be reconciled and forgiven. And I have that hope to live in this life, but also that when I die, I get to be with him in eternity. So it's not just that I have this life, but also a life to come. But while I have this short 20, 30, 40, 50 years on earth, I know that God has a plan for me, a way that I could live that would honor him and bless my wife and children and whoever else I come across, whoever else I come across.
In today's society, biblical instruction is often opposed. Why do you believe it's so critical for us to raise our children with biblical values, even when it is countercultural?
Because some of life's most important questions, like where did we come from? Where do we go after this life? Who are we? What is morality? Is there such a thing as right and wrong? And if there is, who gets to define it? What is the purpose and meaning for my life? All these things, a child is going to learn from somewhere. Someone's going to tell him the answers to this. The answer might be wrong. The answer might be right. not everyone adheres to a religion, but everyone has a worldview or a framework that influences how they think and how they behave. And because I know that not just adults, but even children are going to be shaped by what's around them, who their friends are, what they watch on TV, and of course, who their parents are. My wife and I have this responsibility, this short, however many years we have with our kids under our roof, to teach them the ways of God, teach them what is true and right and excellent, like it says in Philippians 4. And to be intentional. Yeah. While I have this short time with them, they want to learn from mom and dad right now. They may not want to learn from us later on, when they're teenagers or whatever. They may think that they know more. But while we have this time with them, we want to build that trust that we have with them and let them know that we're a safe place. And hopefully not just to make it about us, but that when they see us, they see past us and see the love of God. And to be able to see and encounter the reality of God through their parents.
So how do you address the misconception that the biblical instruction, raising your kids in biblical values, like you just mentioned, how do you address or respond to the position that that's brainwashing or that's bigoted, right?
First of all, if someone asks me or if someone tells me that's brainwashing or bigoted, I would respectfully ask them, can you tell me what you mean by that? Obviously, that would imply that question implies that they don't like what I'm teaching. But if someone says, hey, I think you're brainwashing or indoctrinating your kids or whatever it is, I would first ask them, can you tell me what you mean by that? Can you explain that? I can tell you don't agree with what I say. But it's like me, as a Christian, if I have a neighbor who's a Muslim, obviously we have foundational differences. He believes this about Jesus, and I believe this about Jesus. Very different Jesus. It's only one or the other. But even though I would disagree with this Muslim neighbor, I would expect that Muslim man to raise his children in the ways of the Quran and take his family to the mosque, because that would be consistent and that would be aligned with what he professes to believe. So I wouldn't be so quick to say that's brainwashing, even though I disagree with what he teaches. I can't call that brainwashing, just as much as if I see an atheist father, it would be consistent that if he teaches his son that there is no such thing as God. So in one hand, I don't think I would be offended, but I think it would be a great opportunity to have a convo with that person. But to fully answer that question, I would say, if you say that I'm brainwashing on one hand, it doesn't matter to me what you say, because God's not going to hold someone else accountable for what I teach my kids. God's going to hold me accountable. So I have to do my best with what the Lord has taught me, is to introduce my children to the ways of God, no matter what anyone says, and make it in a way that they understand at their young age. My son's 8, my daughter's 5. But also, most importantly, to model that. Because I would be sad the day where they said, Dad, yeah, you taught us everything about the Bible, but you acted far from Jesus. That would be a sad day. So I would want to walk that out and model it for our kids.
Yeah. So I know you're very intentional about that. And I know you're a big fan of Voddie Baucham. His book, Family Driven Faith.
Yeah.
You recommended it to me.
Yep.
I've gotten a chance to read through it. And I can see why you feel so strongly about,
Did you like it?
About the book. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what specific practices or teachings from that book, or I guess just in terms of Voddie Baucham's teachings around family-driven faith, do you incorporate in your parenting?
Yeah. In Korean, in the Korean Christian culture, there's kuyok yebe, right? But Voddie Baucham mentioned this thing called family devotion, where he would gather his wife and children and they would read the Bible and pray and sing songs together. For me, that's foreign because I didn't grow up with that. So there's a part of me like, okay, how in the world do I disciple my wife and children? How do I raise a godly home? But that book is built upon Deuteronomy 6, where it commands fathers and wives, fathers and mothers to raise their children in the ways of God and teach them when they lay down, when they go up, when they get up and when they go about their day. So one day when their children turn and ask, Father, what's the meaning of this, this, and this? The father would be able to explain, these represent the times where God came through. These are the times when God showed us this, this, and this, so that they could be able to explain to their children the reason for the faith that they have. So built upon that, I was really challenged to have a family devotion with my family. And what really nudged me was when Voddie Baucham mentioned something like, can you do, if you've never done it before and you just feel overwhelmed by the idea of family devotion, can you do once a month? I'm like, I could do once a month because it's sustainable. Because in my mind, I guess I was thinking, well, am I supposed to prepare like an hour sermon for my kids and my wife every day? I don't think I could do that. And it's just not sustainable. But what we've come to do, we call it family Bible time. At dinner time, we eat, we talk about our day, and I crack open a children's Bible, and I read that, and we answer questions, and sometimes we sing a song, and it maybe lasts 5 minutes. Can we do 5 minutes every weekday? I think we could do that. Now, do we stick to it every day? Some days we don't, or schedules come in, but just trying to be intentional, like 2 to 3 times, 4 times a week. So that's been a big difference in our family. We didn't grow up, that my wife and I didn't grow up with that, and now we get to do it with our children. And right now our children like it. They may not like it later on, but we want to foster and cultivate that. Not just a love for, first, one thing that I hope that it would build is a sense of family tradition, that our children will look back and say, hey, I remember doing that with my parents. But also to teach something that hopefully they will value when they're older, that they would practice, that they would trust God when they're old later on, and they would practice with their children later on. Yeah. So it's like, as Voddie Baucham puts it, a multi-generational faith.
Yeah. You encourage me, brother. You always have, and we've always talked about parenting, and you haven't been shy in your position around homeschooling, and that's something that you ultimately decided to do for your children, right? Why did you ultimately decide to homeschool your children?
It was weird because my wife and I, we grew up public school, and I used to think like homeschool was for weirdos. Like, why in the world would you do homeschool, right? But I learned eventually that, especially with some of the directions that our public schools are going now. I'll just keep it for our family. About a year ago, my wife and I were sitting, and we just had this growing desire to homeschool our kids. And I was like, where's this coming from? Like, we didn't grow up with this stuff. No one was pushing us to do it. But it's like we had this desire at the same time. So I'm like, okay, God, are you leading us to something? And when we also examined just what we believe our son, our firstborn son, Joshua, who's 8 right now, and what his needs were. Nothing against the school that he was at the time, but we just believe that he needs to have a slower paced, to be at home. We wanted to try this thing called homeschool, right? And my wife was on board. She's been a stay-home mom since our son was born. So we recognized that it was a sacrifice, because the idea was that our son and daughter would go to school and my wife would have that time to be at home. But now that was taken away, but she wants to do it. It's been challenging for her, but what really helped us, what helped motivate us was that, hey, we can just take this 1 year at a time. If we feel like this fails, we can put them back in school. So a year later, we talked about it and we prayed about it and we decided to give it another year. So we're going to take it 1 year at a time. So we're going to do another year of homeschool.
That's what's up, man. Has it already been over a year?
Yeah, well, I mean, school's ending in a couple of weeks, but
right. Wow,
yeah.
Wow. So obviously, you mentioned it. I'm a product of public school as well.
Yeah.
I would probably say that attitude that you mentioned earlier probably is something that reflects the majority. I would say probably like the popular societal view on homeschooling.
Oh, what you mean, like homeschool is for weirdos?
Yeah, just kind of that. It's not. It goes against the grain, essentially, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Have you experienced any pushback or adversity?
The only pushback that I've gotten was, I think, well-meaning comments like, what are you doing? Almost like that kind of question. And also, what about the social aspect? That's why I say it's well-meaning, because they obviously care about us, the people who made those comments. But at the end of the day, it's, again, like what I said earlier, God's not going to hold someone else accountable for how I raise my kids. Yeah. For the people who say, like, what are you guys doing? Especially to my wife, because she's the one who's homeschooling. Maybe it's because they don't think she's qualified to do so. And I could understand, because, well, I am a certified teacher here in the state of Washington. My wife is not. But I have confidence in my wife because, first of all, God has entrusted our children to us. We are their parents, and we're their primary educator at home. It starts in the home. So I have full confidence that, first of all, God is leading us in this direction, and my wife is fully capable, and God has equipped her and will equip her and will encourage her to do so, because she is their mother. Yeah. And she doesn't need a certificate to validate her motherhood.
Yeah, exactly. So you said it's going to be close to the end of the school year.
Yeah.
What has been some of the biggest challenges that you guys have faced with homeschooling?
Oh, well, first thing I think about is that originally the idea was to have our son and daughter back in school. My wife would have that time to do whatever she needs to do. You know, she was working full time before our children were born, but that had to take a back seat because she wanted to homeschool. We wanted to homeschool. So that was the first challenge. And the other challenge is figuring out what we're doing. This is our first year of homeschooling, and just learning how to do it as we go, making mistakes as we go, taking it one day at a time. Some days I would come home and I would always ask her, "Hey, how's homeschool?" She said, for the most part, it was good. And there's good days, there's bad days, but she just really values that we have this opportunity to do it. So more than anything, we have this opportunity, we're taking it. It's hard, but we're going to do it, and we find joy in it, because anything that's worth doing is going to be hard.
Yeah. So on the flip side, what have you noticed any specific positive outcomes or benefits within your children?
Yeah.
Since you started homeschooling?
Well, my kids like it, but children are children. So one day they like it, one day they hate it. So we understand that, but we think it's been good for them for the most part. It's been healthy for them because it's built a better bond and trust with their mom, my wife, because she's with them all day, but also a deeper bond with each other. It's like they're good friends and they look out for each other. And I think that's one way to cultivate that bond between brother and sister. Academically, we don't really have concerns with that because they do pretty well. Our daughter, especially Natalie, she would do well in school or homeschool. She always has a workbook or a book or a pencil. She's writing something or drawing. She loves school. Our son's always reading, so we're not concerned with the academics, but it's more of just more of the emotional, behavioral things that we wanted to invest more time to coach from home to teach him. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to parents that are currently, considering doing homeschooling or starting homeschooling?
You are their parent. Ephesians 6:1 says, "Children, obey your parents, for in the Lord, for this is right." That's one of the verses that my wife and I have been teaching our children, because one, it teaches children what to do, especially in our world today, that children are supposed to obey their parents. On the flip side, parents are responsible for teaching their kids the right thing to obey. So it's a two-way, and that's how we both, children and parents, obey God. And I would encourage parents who are considering homeschool that you are their parent. God has entrusted your children to you. Therefore, I want to say this carefully, you are qualified because you're their parent. And if you have the resources, if you're able to do it and you're considering it, yeah, God will equip you to what He's called you to do. If homeschool is what it is, I'm not saying homeschool has to be for everybody, but if you're a parent who's considering that, um, I would say don't from a professional certified teacher. I can say this: don't be discouraged because you don't have an education degree. You're the parent, you're the father, you're the mother. You know your child. Um, so, in a way, I would say, yeah, you can do it, but don't be afraid to ask people for help.
Yeah.
It's one day at a time. For us, it's 1 year at a time. We have that liberty to decide. If it doesn't go well, we have other options. Yeah. But just to be intentional. Yeah, you have to have a plan. You have to have a reason. Like I would probably say, well, why do you want to homeschool? You know, what's the reason why? And what is your intention? What is your purpose? And that will help motivate you, especially if you start to hear some pushback, so that you have a response. Because if you don't have a plan or an intention or a purpose, it could be easier to be swayed. Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't because of this and that. But if you have a clear vision for what you're trying to do with your family, especially as a believer in the Lord, then it makes it easier to follow that in spite of what other people might be saying. Because it is against the grain. But I would say following Christ, being a disciple of Christ, is already going against the grain.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, right? Because when I hear the words homeschooling, my brain automatically defaults to this image of just like, I'm thinking, as you mentioned it, as you talk about it, I'm thinking Christy, Joshua, Natalie. It's just the three of them stuck in this kind of like tight vacuum sealed home, and there's like no exposure to the outside. Yeah, which is exactly the opposite, right? Because you've shared with me about co-ops, you've shared with me about other communities, other parents, and other people, and how they've gone on field trips, and how you tell me about that, man. I want to learn more about that because this was all news to me, right? When you first told me.
Yeah, I got to visit one of their co-ops, or co-op is like a community where for us it's once a week. All the homeschool families of the specific local branch get together at a church, and I got to go there one day when I had a day off from work, and I got to see how they did it, and it was really neat to see all the people there. And one time we went on a field trip to the state capitol in Olympia, and I got to be a part of that. And aside from those field trips, there's times where my wife would just take our kids to the library because they love the library. They could spend hours at the library, or they would take them to the beach. Right now, as we're speaking, they got to go. They're in Chicago hanging out, So they have the liberty to do other things. But primarily, one of my wife's biggest reasons is because when they were in school, she always felt like getting ready for the day to go to school was such a rush, and she felt like she got so frustrated and annoyed with our kids, and then just to send them off, and then she'd drop them off and come back home feeling like man, that wasn't a very good interaction with our kids. And that was pretty frequent. But especially our son, just feeling the need that we need to slow things down for him. It's interesting because he's so fast paced, but we need to slow things down for him. So now my wife she loves to read the Bible with the kids, and they love to read the Bible stories with her over breakfast. So now they don't have to rush. They don't have to hurry to get to one thing and another. They can take their time, and if they express interest in one subject, they can invest more time. Whereas me, I'm a school teacher, so I know this. At a certain time, math is for this time, and then spelling is for this time. You have to go. And it's almost like you have to squeeze 6-7 subjects in a day. And sometimes it's really hard to focus on quality over quantity. But with homeschool, you have that option and that liberty to focus on that quality over quantity.
Awesome, man. Well, as we close off, man, what are your spiritual hopes and dreams for your children?
That's a good question, man. My father asked me this question too. That they would be faithful with God. I've been asked questions like, what do you want your children to become when they're older? meaning what kind of profession you want them to have. And I didn't give them an answer of a profession, but just that they would learn how to be a good person more than what kind of job they have. And how do you become good? Because none of us are good, right? That they would know and trust their Savior, that God is good, and that they would be counted as good and righteous by placing their trust in Him. That they would know the hope of eternity, and they would have hope and joy in this life with God's grace, God's power. I think that's all that I could ask for. Yeah. That they would be responsible. I think all that comes with a life that is in God's hands, that God will shape that person.
Brother, what do you enjoy most about your children? What do you enjoy most about seeing them grow?
Right now, when I come home from work, that they're excited that daddy's home. They run up and hug me and kiss me. And I said it earlier, but all these things are fleeting. This is going to be gone, you know? When they're older, they're going to have their own families. And there might come a time where, you know, they're not that excited to see me. But right now, I want to enjoy this time and use this opportunity to continue building that trust. Because right now, they trust their dad. And it's such a precious thing. It's such a joyful thing that they trust me. And on the other hand, it's such a terrifying thing because I have so much power. Like I could lead them to destruction if I wanted, or I can lead them to life. So this terrifying sense, like, wow, God entrusted these little beings with me and my wife. And there's also this sense of joy. Like, man, I get to build into these kids and build upon this trust that I have with them to ultimately point them to God.
All right, brother. Well, thanks for taking the time, man.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for making the time to come here. I know we got to eat some good grub.
Yep.
And it took some time for us to set up, but you
All
know,
good.
at the end of the day, man, it was good to have you here. But
Yeah.
is there any final advice or messages you want to leave with us before we close?
I think I said it a few times already, but man, I look at life as very short and fleeting. And it's this dichotomy of like good news and bad news. The bad news is our life on earth is temporary. But the good news is like we have today, as long as we have today. And it's to be intentional. And that's not to say I don't make mistakes or I don't intentionally rebel, like I said earlier. But the fact that we have today, whether it's with your wife or your family or your friends or your children, you have today. How are you going to use today, right? And then if you get it tomorrow, how are you going to use tomorrow? One day at a time. So, yeah, man, life is fleeting, and the way you spend your life here will affect how you spend life in eternity. But we have today, so how are we going to spend today? And that's up to you.